What are your thoughts on Quebec imposing a health tax on the unvaccinated and the potential ramifications?
As I said before, I'm old enough to remember a day when this authoritarian nonsense couldn't possibly have happened in the West 2 years ago. This is just like every day you're reading about authoritarian overreach, the othering of people. I mean, how insane would this have to be? The damn vaccine doesn't prevent this disease. In fact, there is very strong, increasingly strong evidence that you're actually more likely to contract it.
So someone actually did ask that, like, what I've heard that, but I haven't seen the papers. I haven't, I don't know what the evidence for that is.
Well, I don't think it's rock solid, but it is increasingly strong.
Yeah,
Let's put it this way.
Love you both. What studies have you read that indicate vaxxed are more likely to contract Omicron? If so, are we seeing early stages of ADE? So, two-part question.
ADE is not the only mechanism that can do this. Is the problem?
Sure, so, but yes, first, just let's address the what's the evidence?
Well, it's like everything else. It is unfortunately compromised by the garbage categories that don't allow us to see who's in what state. Right? So you have.
Okay.
Are you vaccinated? What does that mean? Does that mean are you...
Okay, but some parsing of the evidence makes it look to some people like the vaxxed are more likely to get Omicron.
Yes, including the great Barrington Declaration doctors who published a editorial in the Wall Street Journal, I believe, last week, in which they
make this claim,
and I believe it's hot linked, and they point to it. So anyway, I would invite people to take a look at that. But let's put it this way. The fact that this is even ambiguous tells you that you have no justification for mandating that anybody get these vaccines, right? If it is debatable whether you are more or less likely to contract the disease, and there's no reduction in your viral load, and therefore the likelihood of you transmitting it, who in hell gets to tell you need a vaccine that could plausibly make you more vulnerable and doesn't prevent anybody else from getting it to you? Like, what?
Yeah.
What? It's the height of insanity, right? This is telling you that I shouldn't do this here, but Omicron is telling you that what we were beginning to understand earlier in the pandemic, that the response to COVID makes no sense, that in some sense, our worst fears were right? Given Omicron, much should have changed about the recommendations from public health authorities. And the fact that it didn't tells you this isn't about public health.
Can I put you in the hot seat for a minute?
I guess.
It's the end of we're done.
It's the end of the podcast as we know it. And I feel fine.
You feel a little nervous?
Yeah.
I'm wondering... you in particular, and I also, but you in particular advocated very strongly and for quite a long time for very short, very intense and complete lockdowns. Like 2 weeks of like no one interacts with anyone that they're not living with. 2 weeks though.
This is before early treatment existed or was known to exist.
Well, I guess that's. I think early treatment was actually known to exist, but it's before we knew.
Yeah.
So maybe you just answered the question then.
I know what question you're trying to ask.
Is there a situation that you can imagine in the future when you, for some as of yet unspecified pathogen, where you would? It's of course also putting aside the is it even possible?
Yep.
An actual complete lockdown for really fucking finite though. Can you imagine advocating for that in the future?
Well, let's put it this way. The bar would be a lot higher because we have now seen so much in the way of shenanigans over claims about what is true of these pathogens that I would be very hesitant, because who's to say whether we will be fed a bunch of garbage in order to get us to agree to some stuff that isn't actually about public health again. Right. However, I do believe, here's the hard part of the question. You've got two worlds. One world, you get ahead of COVID and you drive it to extinction, okay? The other world, you dick around and it becomes endemic and you're stuck with it.
Yep.
The price of COVID to humanity is not comparable in these two scenarios. We can't say it's 1,000 times greater in scenario 2 because it's indefinitely greater based on the fact that you're going to keep paying a price, even if the price is small every year. How many years is humanity stuck with SARS-CoV-2's descendants? Right? This is insane. And, another thing, how much life was lost? Not how many lives were lost. That's not a good question.
Yeah.
How much life did each of us lose? And I believe each of us have had our life expectancy dropped by the botching of COVID, by the release of it, and the botching of it. But nonetheless, the point is, the argument for a severe, intense, very short-lived lockdown was that we had no mechanism of controlling this disease inside of a house, right? It gets into your house, it ricochets around, but it's short duration for each of the people. And so the point is, for any given house, you could burn it out. If it's in your house, it would ricochet around and then be burned out. Nobody would be capable of transmitting it to anybody. So when you went back to interacting, it would be effectively gone. And then the second part of the argument was that will not be perfectly effective. There will be houses in which something weird happens. And the point is, then you need to have high quality testing and you need to find the places where the intense lockdown didn't work, right? And then you need to chase down those things. So it's a 1-2 punch. That would be thoroughly justified by the advantage of not living in a world with COVID on the loose forever, right? This has long since passed us by as a possibility. So I would say there are circumstances in which you could justify a very short intensive lockdown. But here's the key for all of those of you who are looking at me like, what, did you lose your mind? I do not believe that the governmental structure that would be capable of doing this honorably exists. I don't believe it exists on Earth. I don't believe it's been formulated, which means I believe there is one tool and one tool only that they are entitled to use should such a lockdown be justified on the basis of, hey, we've got a clock ticking and we've got to drive this thing to extinction. Otherwise, we're going to get stuck with it forever. The one tool that they are allowed to use is persuasion. They have to convince us. And persuasion does not mean we're going to throw all of the dissidents off of social media and then pretend we have a consensus about the right thing to do. It means we are all going to get to use all tools available. We're going to get to listen to whoever we want. We're going to let the argument be fully aired. And if you haven't convinced us that there's a good reason that we should want to do this because we don't want our grandchildren dealing with this pathogen, then you lose. You can't do it, right? And if that was unclear, if that was unclear before, it is absolutely clear now, based on the way the corruption of this system has abused their leverage over us to the nth degree. So the answer is yes, in a theoretical way, but persuasion is their only legitimate tool. And anybody who wants to step into mandate land, we're going to see them coming next time.